The unseen price narrator's voice. It's often said that a child belongs to the entire village, and in the small community of Kanjoka, that sentiment held true. Our lives were intertwined, each of us playing our part in the upbringing of the children, teaching them, guiding them, and protecting them as they grew. But in Amina's case, things were different. Her love for her nephew Juma grew into something far beyond the boundaries of what was considered healthy. I witnessed it all. From the first signs of her intense devotion to the disturbing shifts in their relationship, I can say without a doubt that what happened was not what anyone had expected. Amina, a woman whose heart had longed for children but was denied them, was given the chance to raise her late sister's son, Juma. This child, whom she loved like her own, was everything to her, her blessing, the source of her joy after years of longing. At first, it seemed like the perfect situation. Amina poured all her love into Juma, nurturing him with the care she hadn't been able to give her own children. But as he grew older, I began to see something darker, something troubling beneath the surface. The early years. When Juma was 7, Amina was devastated by the sudden loss of her sister and brother-in-law. Their car had overturned on a bumpy road during a trip to a neighboring town. The tragic accident left Juma an orphan, and Amina, in her grief, immediately stepped in to raise him. The entire village rallied behind her, supporting her as she took on the responsibility of a child who had just lost everything. I remember how she embraced him with such tenderness, never letting him out of her sight. Amina's heart bled for the boy who had no parents left, and I couldn't blame her for wanting to protect him from the harshness of the world. Her own husband, Salim, supported the decision, and they both decided to raise Juma as their own. In the early years, there was no sign of anything amiss. Juma flourished under Amina's care. He became the pride of the village. He would help Amina with small tasks in the house, play with the other children in the evenings, and attend school diligently. But something began to shift as Juma grew older. The first sign came when he turned 11. By then, he had already become a quiet and reserved boy, but it was his increasing... The unseen price narrator's voice. It's often said that a child belongs to the entire village, and in the small community of Kanjoka, that sentiment held true. Our lives were intertwined, each of us playing our part in the upbringing of the children, teaching them, guiding them, and protecting them as they grew. But in Amina's case, things were different. Her love for her nephew, Juma, grew into something far beyond the boundaries of what was considered healthy. I witnessed it all. From the first signs of her intense devotion to the disturbing shifts in their relationship, I can say without a doubt that what happened was not what anyone had expected. Amina, a woman whose heart had longed for children but was denied them, was given the chance to raise her late sister's son, Juma. This child, whom she loved like her own, was everything to her, her blessing, the source of her joy after years of longing. At first, it seemed like the perfect situation. Amina poured all her love into Juma, nurturing him with the care she hadn't been able to give her own children. But as he grew older, I began to see something darker, something troubling beneath the surface. The early years' dependence on Amina that began to raise eyebrows. The overprotection. Amina's obsession with Juma's well-being grew stronger with each passing day. She would walk him to school every morning, and if he was late in coming home, she would worry herself sick. "He's just a boy," Amina would say to herself. "He needs me to protect him." But it wasn't just protection anymore. It was control. She began to refuse help from anyone. She would do everything for him, even when it was clear that he was old enough to do things on his own. If any other children tried to play with Juma, Amina would insist that he was too young for such activities. The other mothers in the village began to notice this, and some even voiced their concerns. One evening, as I sat with my own family by the fire, I overheard two of the elders speaking. "Why does Amina always keep Juma close to her? Doesn't she see that he's becoming too attached?" one of them asked. The other sighed. "I understand her love for him, but she's suffocating him. He needs to grow up and learn to live his life." But Amina dismissed all warnings. Juma has been through so much, she would say. He needs me more than anyone else. And to her, that was enough. The growing distance from the village. As Juma entered his teenage years, he became increasingly reclusive. He no longer joined the other boys by the river or played football like the other children. Instead, he would stay by Amina's side, following her around the house or sitting silently in the corner while she worked. His dependence on her deepened. But more troubling than this was the possessiveness he began to exhibit. I remember one afternoon when a young man from the neighboring village, Tamba, came to visit Amina to ask if she needed help with her farm. Juma had been standing nearby, and when he heard Tamba's voice, he shot up from his seat, his face contorted in anger. "Leave her alone," he shouted. "She doesn't need you." Tamba, taken aback, turned to Amina, seeking reassurance. But Amina, instead of reprimanding Juma, simply chuckled and waved it off. "He's just protective," she said, her voice light. "He doesn't like when others get too close." But I saw it in her eyes. She didn't fully understand the gravity of what was
happening. Days turned into weeks, and Juma's behavior only worsened. He would stand in the doorway of Amina's hut, watching her as she cooked or worked. He never left her side, and Amina continued to indulge him, offering comfort instead of discipline. The incidents that changed everything. The situation escalated when Juma was 17. One evening, during a village celebration, a man named Abdul approached Amina to discuss the upcoming harvest. Juma, who had been standing nearby, suddenly stepped forward and shoved Abdul away from Amina. "Don't touch her!" Juma shouted, his voice filled with an unnatural aggression. The entire gathering fell silent. People exchanged nervous glances. Amina, embarrassed, tried to calm Juma down. "Juma, stop this right now," she said softly. But Juma didn't listen. His eyes were wild with anger, and I saw something in him that I hadn't noticed before. He was no longer a boy. He was a man, consumed by jealousy and an unhealthy attachment to Amina. I could feel the unease spreading through the crowd. No one knew what to say or do. It was a turning point, the moment when the villagers began to realize that Amina's love for Juma had gone beyond the boundaries of what was acceptable. Amina's desperation. After that incident, Amina became even more isolated from the community. She dismissed the villagers' concerns and continued to indulge Juma's every need. "He's my son now," she would say, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and fear. "He's all I have left. I cannot lose him." But the truth was, Leon Juma was already lost. His obsession with Amina had taken root deep within him, and it was no longer a harmless attachment. One day, as I sat with a group of villagers, I overheard Amina speaking to her closest friend, Halima. "Juma doesn't understand," she said softly. "He loves me. He needs me. But it's the only way I can show him that he is mine." Halima looked at Amina with concern. "Amina, this love is not normal. You need to set boundaries for him before it's too late." But Amina shook her head, her face pale with worry. "I can't lose him. He's all I have. Without him, I have nothing." The unraveling. As Juma turned 18, his behavior became more erratic. He no longer just followed Amina around. He began to control her every movement. If she spoke to any man, even an elderly villager, Juma would demand that she stop. He began writing in a notebook that he kept hidden from everyone. One day, I overheard him muttering to himself as he walked past Amina's hut. "She's mine. No one can take her from me." That evening, Amina found the notebook. She opened it and read the disturbing entries. Obsessive, possessive words that chilled her to the bone. "No one will take her from me," one page read. She's my queen, and I'll protect her forever. Amina was shaken to her core. The love she had for Juma had created something dark and twisted. She had given him everything, but in doing so, she had lost him entirely. The final act. The village council met after several more unsettling incidents. Juma's behavior had become a danger, not just to Amina, but to the entire community. Amina, still in denial, resisted their intervention. But eventually, Juma was sent away to live with his uncle in another village. Amina, devastated, could do nothing but watch as her nephew, her son in her eyes, was taken from her. That night, as I sat with Amina by the fire, she looked at me with a broken heart. I thought I was helping him, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I was only hurting him. I never saw it until it was too late. The story of Amina and Juma remains a cautionary tale in the village of Kanjoka, a tale of love taken too far, a love that blinded a mother to the dangers of overprotection. Amina's blind devotion to Juma ultimately led to his destruction, and in the end, she was left alone, broken and full of regret. It's a story that reminds us all that love, when unchecked, can be a dangerous thing.